So, greetings everyone. My name is Aditya Jagtap. I'll be discussing the passage questions or the verbal questions from your ANUBHAV CSAT paper. So, a brief overview about the paper because शुरू करने से पहले we should have an idea about what to expect from CSAT and passages. I think all of you all have a fair idea, but just to give you a brief overview, कि 25 से 30 क्वेश्चंस अप्रॉक्स पैसेजेस के पूछे जा रहे हैं these questions this is based on the past 3 to 4 years. So in this paper we have given 27 questions. These 27 questions can be these are all passage questions, right? So we can oversimplify these into three categories. One is the most basic category, which is the main point question type. So इसमें we can include crux of the passage, message of the passage, these type of questions. The second question type can be inference. And the third question type, again, I'm oversimplifying here just for you to keep a track कि आपके strengths, weaknesses क्या है. Third question type can be assumption. Whenever we encounter these question types, I'll give you a brief overview कि inference, assumption questions में क्या करना है, how to look for certain things, how to be accurate in these questions. And I will also show you the method that I teach in our classes. So to begin with, the paper has been kept, it's simulated based on the previous year UPSC papers. So it's quite close to how the actual paper is in the exam. So those of you who are looking to solve all 27 questions of passages, you should keep a track कि इसमें से आपके strengths, weaknesses क्या है. All right. So just a moment, let's get started. So this is your first set. We are solving from set C. In set C, the first passage. This is a passage about cricket, and this is about pay parity, meaning equal pay for women and men in cricket, international cricket, Indian cricket. So पहले तो न्यूजीलैंड का एग्जांपल दिया है कि remunerate its women cricketers the same as their male counterparts is a major landmark. This is encouraging more girls to take up the sports, to take up sports in general. Similar to this, we are told, however, in India, any to narrow the monetary gap between men and women, especially in India, is avoided based on the reason given is lower market ratings for ladies game. So ladies के cricket game के लिए market ratings are lesser, meaning fewer people are watching those games. So they aren't paid as much. Then the author recommends us, but it is prudent to focus on the factors that are holding women back. So we should focus on the factors that are holding women back, such as unequal opportunities, curtailed, lesser playing time, lesser investment. And the reason for men playing more sports, according to the passage, is because of social conditioning. Now, remember, in throughout the discussion, I am throughout the discussion marking. So throughout the discussion, remember that I have marked the passages in green, and the words which are marked in green are to indicate the main point of the author. Now you can call this different things: central argument, main idea, main message, crux of the author, XYZ. This can be marked in more words than the ones I've chosen or fewer words. But overall, what I want you to pay attention to is this what you also felt is the main point of the author? Meaning is, in short, is your reading efficient? So this marking that I've done is for you to determine whether you're reading in an efficient way in the exam, right? Please keep a track of that. So let's see from the passage what is the first question that is asked. So we are asked which reflects the critical message. तो ये हो गया main point question, right? Author का main point क्या है इसमें? Now let's start with option D here. It is time journey towards pay parity is hastened. So we should achieve pay parity faster. Now, if you notice, this is actually discussed in the passage. The author implies here that it would be prudent, it should be wise for us to focus on what is holding women back. Right? So the author is trying to say that we should achieve pay parity faster. But D is not our answer, despite being factually correct, D is not our answer because being factually correct here is not the same as the main point of the author. I can discuss many facts that are stated in the passage, but they won't necessarily be the main point of the author, right? So D is not the main point, even though we can say it's factually correct. Let's look at option B. The need of the hour is to improve the social condition of women. Social condition of women not exactly discussed. Social conditioning is discussed. And we can say based on this also that maybe social condition can be improved. That is suggested by the author. But again, it's not the main message. Correct? So students who have chosen B or D, you want to remember that these can be considered factually true, but it's not the main message. Main message of the author is uh, pay parity should be achieved, or we should try and achieve this. And there are some challenges or hurdles to this. So we should include both these points in to be as close to the main point of the author as possible. This is not done in options B and D. Option C, reducing the pay gap, is about being fair and respectful and recognizing the effort and excellence women bring to the sport. So we are told what reducing the pay gap is about. The passage does not speak about respecting or disrespecting women. This is not discussed in the passage or implied in the passage. So this would be outright incorrect. And again, the part of uh, reducing pay gap is correct, but challenges part remains. So B, C, and D are invalid. A is the correct choice. It covers achieving gender pay parity is good. It is important, but challenges remain. Challenges of social conditioning, which is the last part of the passage, right? Men take to sports because of social conditioning. All right. So A is the correct choice for this question. Look at the next one. The second question from this is an assumption question. Okay. Now, an assumption is something that is a valid assumption is necessary for passage to be true, right? So let's look at statement one. Society has nudged. Society has let's simplify this to society has pushed women to internalize that sporting participation is not for them vis-a-vis men. So vis-a-vis men is simply as compared to men. If you look at the last sentence of the passage, it says, men taking to sports is largely because of social condition, and women are being held back because of unequal opportunities, curtailed playing times, etc., etc. So we are told that society pushes men towards sports and pushes women away from sports, right? So society has pushed women to believe, to internalize would be to believe that sporting participation is for men, correct? So this is a valid assumption. If you look at the first statement, which is a valid assumption, this is necessary for the passage to be true. If we said society has not pushed women, if this option stated that society has not pushed women, then the last statement of the passage would become untrue. So remember what I told you about assumptions. A valid assumption is necessary for the passage to be true. Correct? So statement one is a valid assumption. Statement two, for women, it is not non-trivial to be recognized at the same level as men. Now, assumption two has confused a lot of students, and UPSC does this. This is called a double negative. Right? It's complicated for us to read because of firstly, it sounds complicated. So obviously, we feel कि थोड़ा challenging है. So we have to simplify this. ये एग्जाम में आएगा at least once in one of the options you'll find a double negative. So oversimplify it or simplify it like this. For women, it is trivial. Trivial meaning not meaningful, unimportant, let's say. Unimportant to be recognized at the same level as men. Right? So this option is obviously untrue. For women, it is important. It would be important and not unimportant. So a not non-trivial is invalid. So the correct answer is option A here. So the correct answer in this case is option A. All right. Let's see the next one. Now, here in this passage, we are discussing digital divide. ये concept तो हमने सुना है. So, about the digital divide, the passage is saying it may cause technological, social, and educational types of inequality. So, digital divide, which types of inequalities it causes? Further, e-government is an important means to break barriers. तो e-government is important for people to be included, पर digital divide की वजह से वो मिल नहीं पाता, right? Then in the last sentence, the author says a digital divide may result in political alienation of those who lack digital media access. So, in short, digital divide के negative causes or negative outcomes, right? Okay, let's look at the question. So now we are asked assumptions. In assumptions, like I said, a necessary assumption, a valid assumption is necessary for the passage to exist. Now here, let's look at statement 2. Bringing the digital divide, bridging the digital divide, right? Reducing the digital divide could help empower citizens technologically. तो ये तो होगा first half of the passage से, right? यहाँ पे technological gap reduce हो जाएगा, and as well as politically. This is also true, right? From the last sentence in the passage, this is also true. Political alienation, correct? So 2 is a valid assumption. Statement 1, by reducing the digital divide, a nation is transformed. A nation is transformed into a knowledge-based society. So ye transformed into a knowledge-based society is invalid. This is nowhere required for the passage to be true. So option B, that is 2 only, is the correct choice. Okay. Let's look at the next set of passages. Here we are talking about the negative effects of packaged food, which is high salt and high sugar based. So packaged food ke effects, one of the effects is obesity related malnutrition is on the rise in India. In India, malnutrition is a problem, undernutrition is a problem, right? And we are told older population is affected by one, which is malnutrition, younger population is affected by undernutrition. And then the author tells us India has no significant programs for obesity and malnutrition affected by obesity. So since we have no great programs, then the author here recommends which type of programs we should use or select. Community nutrition approach should be used. Author gives us an example. Iodine से goiter कम करने के लिए जैसे iodine use किया जाता है, right? And the same way we should use a similar approach to stop packaged food consumption, etc. Right? This approach is preventive. Now let's look at the type of questions. So first, assumptions. Statement 1, it is not possible to overcome malnutrition by obesity as it is preventive in nature. Not possible to overcome malnutrition, invalid. Right? The author is telling us how to overcome through community programs. So this is invalid to say not possible. Second, absence of government programs for fighting malnutrition is the primary cause of its existence. A primary cause is not absence of government programs. If you look at the passage is saying no significant programs. मतलब कोई तो programs है. There are some programs in existence. So we can't say that absence of government programs is primary cause. So this is invalid. Left with 3 only, which is people should be encouraged to eat fresh and nutrition rich food instead of packaged or high salt foods. Now, many of you will say ki this is not directly stated in the passage. But what did I tell you with assumptions? A valid assumption is necessary for the passage to exist, meaning people should be encouraged not to eat not to eat packaged or high salt foods. ये तो फर्स्ट लाइन ऑफ द पैसेज से बन जाए. This means people should be encouraged to eat fresh and nutrition rich food. इसी का मतलब हो जाएगा कि not packaged and not high salt foods. Correct? So statement 3 is a valid assumption. It's necessary for the first sentence of the passage to exist. This was a slightly tricky assumption question. Let's look at the next question from the same passage. Here best reflects the message, which is the main point question in the most basic form, right? Now let's look at option D. Companies manufacturing packaged food should be adequately regulated. ये कहीं पे भी डिस्कस नहीं हुआ है, ये ऑथर का मेन पॉइंट नहीं हो सकता. ऑप्शन डी इज इनवैलिड. Option A, with the success of fighting goiter, the community nutrition approach is the best approach for fighting malnutrition. Many students have gone with option A. Remember, if you say best approach, unless and until you compare approach 1 with approach 2 with approach 3 with approach 4 in the passage, and the author outsays approach 4 is the best possible approach, we can't use the word best approach. This is not stated in the passage. Option A is invalid. Now, option C, if you notice, I've marked it in orange. Government needs to devise more effective programs for fighting malnutrition by obesity. So this one needs to devise more effective programs. This can be valid from the passage, right? The passage is saying currently the programs are not as efficient, no significant programs. Correct. So option C will put aside and we'll compare it with option B. Right? Considering the ill consequences or the negative effects, India should focus on handling malnutrition by obesity by using the community nutrition approach. So the author in in the passage had spoken about how to fight this problem. To fight this problem, use the solution. Correct. So best reflects the message, includes the main point of the author, the complete message of the author. Complete messages. India would focus on handling malnutrition by obesity. तो ये problem statement. पहले problem ये है, right? इसके लिए author ने ये solution बताया. So this includes both problem plus solution, as compared to option C, which just includes a part of possible solution. Government needs to devise more effective programs. This is part of solution. It's not even telling us which type of programs. Which type? This is left unsaid. Correct? So C is not our answer. B is the correct answer for this question. All right. Remember this, many of you have gone with A, many have gone with C, but here B is the correct choice. You want to capture the message of the author as closely as possible, right? This begins with, like I'd stated initially, with efficient reading of the passage. The better your identification of the main point. I've marked it with using a few more words than I usually would, but this is just to tell students that you can have a few more words or few less words than what I've marked. But the reading of the passage should be efficient and your identification of the main point should be clear. All right, so let's look at the next one. Okay, so here we're talking about EQ, emotional quotient. With an interconnected world, we might assume that today's children have higher EQ. So we are, because of interconnected world, we are assuming children have higher EQ. But the truth might be quite different. Now there's going to say that children have lower EQ basically. And the reason the author is saying that we are glued to screens. Relating to others and relationship management is an important element that nurtures high EQ. So high EQ के लिए क्या चाहिए? According to the author, relating to others and relationship management, right? But technology and its addiction is a hindrance in attaining high EQ. So according to the author, technology is a hindrance, is an obstacle in high EQ. So because of technology, in short, we can say because of technology, children are not able to relate to others and they are not good at relationship management. All right. So let's look at the assumptions. Technology directly impacts the EQ of children. Now, this is based on this sentence. Technology and addiction among children are a hindrance. So directly impacts is a valid assumption. If I said technology does not impact, the passage would have been invalid, right? So this tells me that statement one is a valid assumption. Let's look at two. As compared to technology, human relations have a positive impact on EQ. So what is good for EQ? Relating to others and relationship management. So these, let's say one and two, have a positive impact on EQ. So both are valid assumptions. So the correct answer is here C, both 1 and 2. All right, let's see the next one. Now, in this case, fairly easy passage is talking about the negative impact of invasive species, right, on biodiversity and ecosystems. So throughout here, the negative impact is captured with more and more details as to how much, to what degree critically endangered species are affected by invasive species. And then the author says species most at risk from predators have high evolutionary distinctiveness and inhabit insular environments. Now, this can sound or is possibly challenging to us. We don't know what insular environments might mean, right? But we'll try and figure out the meaning of that word. Many times in the exam, we don't know the meanings of specific words, but then we have to estimate their meaning. Notice I'm not using the word guess. We are trying to estimate its meaning based on the sentences or words before or after it. We are told those species are most at risk that have distinctiveness. So they're unique evolution wise, they're quite unique and they have inhabit insular environments. So invasive mammalian predators are therefore important drivers of irreversible loss. So we are told invasive species cause irreversible loss. Most impacted species are insular. So again, the same word insular, right? And then the author says indicates that management of invasive predators on islands should be a priority. So insular are those which are located in one location. This we can estimate, right? Such as those located on islands. Okay. So fairly easy passage. Invasive species threaten biodiversity, especially in insular environments. Okay. Now let's look at inferences. Now an inference is a conclusion based on other facts or conclusions. So in short, inference is a conclusion based on passage, right? Information in the passage. So if you look at statement one, invasive species along with being dangerous for the environment. So there's nothing wrong with the option here. Have some potential benefits. Potential benefits of invasive species not discussed in the passage. One is an invalid inference. Second inference, island species are the most vulnerable to extinction due to invasive predators. Now, in this, categorically, the word we need to check whether it's valid or invalid is the most vulnerable, right? This is the word we need to check whether we can accept it or not as a valid inference. Now, species most at risk are inhabit insular environments. Islands are those which are included in insular environments. So therefore, most species, which is most island species are vulnerable, right? So island species are the most vulnerable to extinction. So two is a valid inference, right? Again, we are combining two facts here. Species most at risk are located in insular environments such as islands. So therefore, island species are the most vulnerable to extinction. Option B is a valid inference. All right. Let's look at the next one. Which one of the following best reflects the crux? This is a main point question. Basically, crux is best message, central message, main idea. Option A speaks of to ensure the survival of the human race. This is not discussed in the passage, so it can't be the crux of the passage. B says countries across the world should fund biodiversity conservation, especially on islands. Again, not the main point of the main point is invasive species are dangerous, especially in insular environments. C says invasive species can grow anywhere. So this is obviously beyond scope. D is the only possible choice. Invasive predators have the potential to change species diversity of an ecosystem, especially insular ecosystems. Right? This part has been excluded in the option, but none of these options are satisfying. So we're only left with option D. Remember, the only real way to be accurate in the exam is to use elimination. We can rarely select an option unless the question is really easy, which is very rare that we can select an option. We always should eliminate our way to the answer choice. Uh, this passage is about ecosystem services. Ecosystem services are designed for us. Benefits to human welfare, right? And these ecosystem services are at risk. Pollination is one such ecosystem service, right? Crop pollination and its importance is told to us, how important it is. We are told crop pollination is not well studied. Detailed studies are incomplete, correct? And then the author in the last sentence tells us the decline of pollinating species can lead to a parallel decline of plant species. So, an ecosystem service like pollination can be affected, and this impact, the decline of pollinating species, can affect plant species as well. All right, let's look at the question. We are looking for inferences. We are looking for valid conclusions we can make based on facts in the passage, right? Let's look at statement to protect ecosystem services. Holistic contemporary research in crop pollination may be beneficial. We are told what is required to protect ecosystem services in the passage has been only discussed in a glancing way. Uh, Crop pollination is cited as an example of endangered ecosystem service. However, detailed studies are incomplete. So, this endangered service could have benefited with more detailed studies. Correct? This situation could have improved with more detailed studies. This is what is written in between the lines. So, to protect ecosystem services, or to, let's say, I'm oversimplifying this, to improve ecosystem services, better research may be beneficial, right? So if you just read it like this, to improve ecosystem services, better research may be beneficial. Option 1 becomes clearly a valid inference. Let's look at option 2. Loss of pollinator species can have grave consequences for human nutrition. Is this acceptable or not acceptable? Now, grave consequences becomes difficult for us to check. We don't know if the consequences are grave or not for human uh, nutrition, right? So let's look at this as uh, okay. Let me clarify this as we'll break this down in stages. Loss of pollinator species, right? Let's first check for this. So loss of pollinator species, pollination is a key ecosystem service, right? So let's say loss of pollination, which is a key ecosystem service, can have consequences for human nutrition. So I'm not checking the word grave right now. I'm just checking consequences for human. So just a moment. So this loss of pollination, which is a key ecosystem service, will affect human welfare. correct? So let's say A affects B is clearly discussed in the passage, right? So now what I'm looking for is, can I use the word grave? Can have grave consequences. Now, how do I check the word grave? Let me actually change the color of what I'm. So how can I check the word grave, right? The word grave can be checked by here. It's a key ecosystem service. So key services is lost. This would have some significant impact. This is one fact. And the second fact is decline of A can cause decline of B, right? So here, if there's decline of plant species, so this is our second plant's decline. So putting both of these together, we can say therefore consequences are grave. All right. So many students have gone with just A here, but the correct answer is C, 1 and 2 only. All right. Now let's see the next one. Now this was a little difficult passage to read. Sometimes UPSC presents us with difficult passages. This is about the way studies are conducted in sociology. All right. So the author says there are multiple truths and multiple methods to conduct studies in sociology. Correct. Now to tackle this, there are different types of ways to conduct this research, and different types of situations will lead to different types of research methodologies. So according to the author, it is futile, it is pointless to argue about method one, let's say, method one versus method two. So which method is the best method for sociological truth? The author says this kind of debate is futile. मतलब इसका फायदा नहीं है ये सोच के कि कौन सा मेथड सबसे अच्छा मेथड. It is more important to ask if the method chosen is appropriate for what question you are trying to answer. Then the author says there are different types of methods, such as quantitative methods and qualitative methods. फिर इनको define कर रखा. Quantitative में you can count, you can measure the phenomenon like proportions, averages, etc. And qualitative में you are trying to gather more, difficult to quantify data, abstract data, hard to measure data, attitude, emotion, etc. Right? So overall, according to the author, multiple truths are there in sociology, and to study them, multiple methods are there. Correct? So it is pointless to argue about which method is best. It is more important to ask if you're using the appropriate method. All right, let's look at the question. So, in especially passages like this, the clarity of your reading process is quite important. The the more clear your reading process, the more efficient your reading process, the more accurate you're going to be with the questions. So we are looking for inferences. Statement 1 says participant observation is the best method to use. Like the author has stated, superiority of a method, inferiority of a method is a futile argument. You need to check which method is appropriate. So participant observation is the best method to use if one wants to determine whether majority of Indian families are still considered joint families. Now, इसके लिए some method is discussed in the passage, right? We'll check that method. For example, if one is interested in finding out whether most Indian families are still, then a census or a survey is the best method, correct? However, if one wishes to compare status of women in nuclear families, then participant observation may be appropriate. So, for majority of Indian families being joint families, participant observation is not suggested at all. तो बेस्ट मेथड तो है ही नहीं, not discussed in the passage. One is invalid. Two, there is no single objective method in sociology because there are many competing truths. This is a valid inference we notice here. The author has said there is no single unique road to sociological truth. Correct? So, B is the correct choice for this statement. Statement 2 is a valid inference. Let's look at the next question from the same passage. Most important implication. This is basically the main point, right? And but main point implied by the author, right? Okay, so let's start with option A. It's crucial to select the one right research approach. According to the author, ऐसा कोई approach है ही नहीं. One right research approach, so A is invalid. C, the status of women has improved in nuclear families. This is not mentioned in the passage, and this is not the most important implication. Most important implication has to be about sociological studies, right? It has to be about this, not about whether the status of women has improved or not improved. So C is invalid. B, for the most portion, qualitative research methods are used in sociological procedures. So qualitative research is used more. Again, not discussed in the passage. These are all invalid. B is the correct choice. The path to sociological truth is not through a one size fits all approach. You need to use appropriate method for appropriate question. Correct? There is no best method. So B is the correct choice, not through one size fits all approach. All right. All right, let's see. In this passage, now the author is arguing between two kinds of ways in which government should interact with the economy. One is this Keynesian way, where substantial government spending is done in times of crisis. तो मतलब मार्केट में पैसे नहीं है या मार्केट में लोग ज्यादा पार्टिसिपेट नहीं कर रहे, your economy is slowing down, then government should spend more money and therefore push some money in the market and push the market to start functioning again. And this is called Keynesian. As opposed to this is Hayek's work. This says कि ज़्यादा pushing in by the government, ज़्यादा spending by the government leads to long-term stagnation. Now the passage says most nations went with Keynes. So most nations decided to do substantial government spend, right? And about this, the author says which kind of spending they did in the form of cash handouts, putting money in people's pockets. They hoped this would awaken demand, lift the spirit of business, etc. But actually, according to the author, this idea of Keynesian theory of substantial government spending is a total miscalculated step, right? This most nations going with Keynes is a total miscalculated step because artificially stimulating the economy on such a macro scale inevitably leads to inflation. मतलब it will lead to, inevitably मतलब will lead to this. So this is a very strong way to put it. Will lead to inflation followed by slowdown. All right. So according to the author, this inevitably leads to inflation. Keynesian approach inevitably leads to inflation. All right. Now, according to the passage, why did the Keynesian approach fail? It requires huge government spending, but governments didn't have resources. This is not discussed in the passage that this is why it failed. It said inflation would increase, right? B says it required government should print money in huge amounts. This is, although this could be a part of the Keynesian stimulus, but it's not discussed in the passage. So we can't use our own knowledge, we can't use outside knowledge, we have to rely on the passage. Option B is not stated. Option C, the government transferred money to businesses to hire people. Again, not discussed in the passage. Excuse me. Option D says it can fail because it causes prolonged interference, which ultimately leads to a slowdown, right? Inevitably leads to inflation followed by a slowdown, right? So option D is the correct choice for question 33. Let's look at another question based on the same passage. Which of the following could be a part of the government's approach to combat slowdown? How do you combat slowdown? Now, according to the passage, Knesian approach is not a good idea. So we can say, therefore, Hayek's approach could be better. Could be better, right? So preventing unintended inflation, which is possible Hayek's approach, not certain, but possible, because you're preventing unintended inflation. This is a good idea, right? So one is a valid, we can say, approach to combat slowdown, which is basically this is an inference-based question. So one is a valid inference. Two, providing government jobs is again interference in the market, long-term interference in the market. So two is invalid. A one only is the correct choice for question 34. All right. Now, in this passage, we are discussing the biggest problem of solar energy, right? Solar energy we can get only when the sun is shining. मतलब जब क्लाउडी स्काई होगा ओवरकास्ट स्काई होगा तब नहीं मिलेगी सोलर एनर्जी नाइट में नहीं मिलेगी सोलर एनर्जी now if there was a low cost way of storing solar energy these problems of nighttime and overcast skies wouldn't be a problem तो अगर storage of solar energy achieve कर लिया तो challenges in solar energy will reduce then we are told in the last part nations like Japan and other global leaders are focusing on developing adequate energy storage to deal with this issue. So there are some countries who are trying to develop this storage of energy, right? So storage of solar energy. Now let's look at question 35. We're looking for inferences. Statement 1 says tropical countries with year-long availability of sunshine are less dependent on the storage of solar energy. Now, this idea that let's just say tropical countries are less dependent on storage of solar energy. This is nowhere mentioned in the passage. This is an invalid inference. For an inference, we need some fact stated in the passage. Using that fact, we can lead to a conclusion, which is basically the inferential process. So let's see why many students have gone with option C, right? Why many students have considered one as valid. Now, here, one of the biggest problems of solar energy के बाद, the author has told reasons where this problem can crop up. When there is in the night and the skies are overcast days. Correct? So we actually have not been discussed which part of the globe do tropical countries have better solar energy, not better solar energy. None of this is discussed in the passage. So I can't really compare in the options then. The tropical countries are less dependent. Also, tropical countries could also have overcast days. And obviously, tropical countries will have nights also. So this is not in question. Overcast days, tropical countries can also have, so are less dependent on storage is invalid. Two, in the future, the improvement of solar energy storage capabilities is possible. So this solar energy storage capability is being pursued by Japan. So in the future, this improvement is possible. Statement 2 is a valid inference. Right. Let's look at the next one. Now here, this is an interesting passage. This is talking about why banks find internalization of climate risk challenging. तो banks को ये computing of climate risk challenging क्यों लग रहा है? Right? So one is complexity of climate risk model. ये बहुत complex है determine करना कि which climatic factor can cause how much risk or uncertainty. Then how to measure the impact of climate risk? Climate risk का impact measure कैसे करें, right? So because of this is leading to uh, investment decisions and integration of risk challenges. Banks are finding it hard to take these decisions and integrate risk. Now, Europe में some banks have reported that they could only confine themselves to qualitative assessment. So they can't really have a accurate assessment. A general qualitative assessment can be done because quantification requires good data, and they don't have data. They don't have standardized industry models to check climate risk, right? And third critical challenge is lack of skilled professionals. People also are not there who can help them calculate climate risk. So banks, in short, cannot calculate climate risk, right? This is what the passage is talking about. And multiple reasons are given as to why banks cannot calculate climate risk. Okay, now let's look at assumptions. The first one, traditional risk management approaches are not adequate for measuring climate risk. So we are told that in the passage, we are told, if you notice, that given the complexity of climate risk modeling, measuring impact, new methodology would be required. This is something that the banks are trying to learn. Also, banks are in this current situation, they don't have standardized models and they don't have skilled professionals. So this tells us that existing, let's say, infrastructure or uh, systems, existing systems are not able to calculate climate risk, right? So traditional systems, existing systems are not adequate for measuring climate risk. So statement one, just a minute. Statement one is a valid assumption. It's necessary for the passage to say these current methods are not working. All right. Second one, the climate risk is compounded by mitigation related regulatory policies. So climate risk is increased by regulatory policies. Regulatory policies increasing climate risk has not been discussed in the passage at all. So this is not necessary for the passage to exist, whereas one is necessary for the passage to exist. So A1 only is the correct choice. Now, the other question, now this is an interesting question. What is climate risk? Interesting because just like that double negative question option that I discussed earlier, you'll get at least one or two questions where in UPSC where the question is asking you about a certain term in the passage, climate risk. और ये inverted commas में है because in the passage it's mentioned. But can we find out the meaning of climate risk based on the passage? This is not us trying to estimate its meaning. This is just us trying to check whether the passage has suggested its meaning, right? So remember, for these type of questions, first go and figure out what the passage is trying to state about climate risk, whether you can determine its meaning. So climate risk is discussed as is difficult for banks to calculate. Uh, the modeling of climate risk is hard. Measuring the impact of climate risk is hard. Mm. Banks can only take qualitative decisions. Quantification is hard. Standardized models, again, this is discussed here. Standardized models don't exist to calculate climate risk. And skilled professionals are not there to calculate climate risk. So, what is climate risk? None of these actually tell us what climate risk is. This is not telling us what climate risk is. Lack of standard models is not telling us what climate risk is. Skilled professionals are not, again, not telling us what climate risk is. So, climate risk is actually not defined in the passage. Let's look at the options. A, risk precipitated by significant losses or cost of adjustment because of transition to a low carbon trajectory, not discussed in the passage, that this is climate risk. B, risk arising from economic costs and financial losses, especially due to physical impacts of climate change. Again, not discussed in the passage as the definition for climate risk. And C, risk to a bank's revenue, not discussed. D cannot be inferred from the passage. D is the correct choice. There's no clear definition of climate risk, right? Option D is the correct choice. This was a little tricky. Many students have gone with option C, and that's because it sounds correct. If you notice, climate risk in the passage has just been discussed as, let's oversimplify this, as a challenge to banks. Internalization of climate risk is a challenge to banks. What is climate risk? This is not discussed in the passage. Right? This is not really implied or suggested by the passage. So option D is the correct choice in this case. Okay. Now here we're talking about new advancements in technology और इसके impacts. Agriculture पे क्या impacts है इसके? If completely transform modern agriculture, we are told in what way they can impact modern agriculture. Drones use कर सकते हैं, seeding, weeding, automated harvest, etc. Farm automation technology can help with rising global population. So now after telling us that this technology in agriculture, what kind of technology is used, the author now tells us where or how it can help us. Rising global population may it can help us. It can help us to address factors like shifting consumer preferences, shortage of labor, and reducing environmental footprint. So technology can benefit agriculture and solve all these problems. All right. So let's look at which of the following best reflects the central idea, main point of the author. A says the supply chain of agricultural produce will transform with evolving technologies. Central idea in this case was technology benefiting agriculture in this specific way, right? So supply chain will transform, not discussed in the passage. C says there is a dire need for automation of agriculture in India, not discussed in the passage, to alleviate status of marginal farmers, not discussed. So C is invalid. D, application of modern technology will increase the input cost. So will increased input cost will decrease input cost. Neither of these are discussed in the passage. D is invalid. So the correct choice is option D. Deployment of agricultural technologies can not only solve socio-economic issues, but also improve the environment. So solving socio-economic issues and improving the environment is basically restating the last few sentences of the passage, right? Help with rising global population. So rising global population we can say socio-economic issue and environmental footprint, right? So improve the environment. We can also include other like these, but basically option B is replacing the last few sentences of the passage. Option B is the correct choice. Let's look at the next one. Now, this was a trickier passage to read than all the rest of the passages in the paper. Like I said, a few tricky passages can be expected in the exam. Here we are trying to discuss various factors help people in believing that people from different countries hold different values. So ये people from different countries have different values. ये belief कहाँ से आता है? According to the author, various factors are needed. We are told factors such as social learning, etc., etc. And these factors will lead us to magnify the differences between groups. So we tend to see differences between groups. But the author says values subsume a wide range of behaviors. मतलब values का subset is behaviors. Correct? Values include, subsume means include a wide range of behaviors. Now, people may perceive difference between social groups because of different uh, specific behaviors that are seen as exemplars of values. In other words, the author actually quite simply tells us what he or she was trying to say. People in different social groups may endorse the same values but associate different behaviors with them. Correct? So different social groups may have same values. So social group A and B have same values, but A and B will have different behavior but associate different behaviors with them. For example, value of equality. In some countries, this will mean gender equality, and in some countries, this will not mean gender equality, right? So A and B have the same value of equality, but their behavior about equality is different, right? So remember that, and this is especially important for tricky passages, that if you find a section of the passage which is trying to simply explain what is taking place, reread that at least 2 to 3 times to make sure that you've put the rest of the passage in perspective. This is only really helpful for the difficult passages. All right, let's see what the kind of questions that are on this passage are. First is an assumption question. The value of gender equality should be universal. Gender equality is used as an example. It is not really stated in the passage that the value of equality should be equal to gender equality everywhere, right? It's just being used as an example to show us that two groups may have same values but different behaviors. All right, so one is invalid. Second, values influence behavior. So if you remember, values का subset is behavior, right? So values influence behavior is correct. We can't say behaviors influence values. So and vice versa, this is incorrect. Many students have gone with option B here, and that's because this is acceptable, but this is not acceptable. So you need to pay attention to this also. D is the correct choice for question 51. Let's look at another question that is formulated from this passage. What kind of relationship exists between group values and behaviors? Values subsume behaviors, right? Behaviors are a subset of values. So let's look at one. Behavior can reflect group value. So behaviors can reflect group values. Valid. Two different behaviors may stem out of the same group values, right? So this is true from the last example of the passage, right? Equality for group A may mean gender equality. For group B, it may not mean gender equality, right? So different behaviors from same group values. So both are valid. 1 and 2 both are valid in this case. Option C is the correct choice. All right. Now, another question from the same passage. We're looking for inferences, right? We are trying to make conclusions based on facts or information stated in the passage. Let's look at statement 2. Specific behaviors of groups and their group values have a simple linear relationship. अब ये passage में तो we all can say कि कुछ भी simple और linear है नहीं, passage ही इतना मुश्किल है. But in any case, specific behaviors and their values have a linear relationship, straightforward relationship. This is not true because there is a general mismatch between values and behavior. Values a subset is behavior. So it can't be a simple linear relationship. So 2 is invalid. Statement 1, understanding group behavior may not help in understanding their specific values. So again, this comes from the same idea, right? So if you understand behavior, understanding group behavior may not help in understanding their values, because values can be same but behavior is different. So A is the correct choice for statement for question number 53, right? So one only. All right. So here governance is being defined in this passage. Governance is being defined, but governance is defined in a wider way. The author is saying it's not just government; it includes much more. So governance encompasses basically, according to the passage, even the private sphere, non-governmental groups, community organizations, private sector, etc. तो सब में governance author ने लिखा है कि all of these organizations may have some governance. Three factors determine the efficacy of any system of governance. Now the author is talking about which three factors lead to efficient governance, and these are mentioned here. Leadership, characteristics of the government, and nature of the structure. If you notice, I haven't really marked these words, right? यहाँ पे three factors लिखा है, तो I know that the factors are mentioned here. इनसे related कोई question आया तो I'll go back and check. तो यहाँ पे तीन factors लिखे. Then we are told कि any organization or institution will have to check and respond to challenges. Now, in the end, the author says this constellation of skills or these multiple skills must draw on both intellectual and moral resources. So, according to the author, there are factors that largely determine efficiency of governance, and they require moral and intellectual resources. And the factors are listed out here, right? And this is governance not just in government, but broadly speaking, even in the private industry. So let's look at the assumptions. Statement one, not only the government, but citizens are also responsible for governance outcomes. Now, here many students have actually gone with B or D, but you need to check whether citizens are also responsible. So, not only the government. So, government is responsible for governance outcomes. This, though we know. But are citizens also responsible? Let's see. Here, factors that largely determine efficacy of any system of governance. Any system matlab government or private or NGO, any, correct? और इसमें ये लिस्ट में दे रखा है लीडरशिप इज वन, सेकंड इज कैरेक्टरिस्टिक्स ऑफ द गवर्न एंड नेचर ऑफ स्ट्रक्चर एंड प्रोसेसेस. तो ये तीन पॉइंट दे रखे, लीडरशिप, कैरेक्टरिस्टिक्स ऑफ द गवर्न एंड नेचर ऑफ स्ट्रक्चर्स. नाउ इन द केस ऑफ गवर्नेंस इन गवर्नमेंट ये केस में लीडरशिप और गवर्नमेंट, कैरेक्टरिस्टिक्स ऑफ द गवर्नड मतलब citizens, right? So here citizens are also responsible is a valid assumption. If I said citizens are not responsible, then the passage would have been invalidated. So like I said, a valid assumption is necessary for the passage to exist. Statement one is a valid assumption. Citizens are also responsible. Statement two, rigid and closed implementation of decisions reduces the capacity of governing institutions. So we are told in the passage that decisions should be closed, decisions should have openness and flexibility, right? So statement two goes is suggesting that close implementation is negative for governance, right? Which is option C is the correct choice for this question. Most of you have either marked B or C. In this case, C would be the correct choice. Let's see the next one. Now, in this case, India's structural transformation has been slow and unique. How has Indian economy transformed as discussed? Abundant low-skilled labor, our growth trajectory has mostly skipped manufacturing, and because of this, it has grown in the skilled services sector. right? Underemployment and low intergenerational mobility have been persistent features of the Indian economy. And because of this kind of negative structural transformation, this has led to deep inequalities. Most of India continues to live in extremely precarious economic conditions. Right? This is what the passage is talking about. Now, let's go to the questions. Passage is fairly easy to read. Let's look at assumptions. Availability of low skilled labor may promote the development of manufacturing sector. We'll put this aside. This we need to check, and many students have gotten this incorrect because of statement one. Let's look at two. Service sector can thrive even on a small workforce. Both of these appear based on just one sentence, right? Which is this, or we can say two sentences, but just one part of the passage. तो यही से ये दोनों assumption बन रहे इसी area से, correct? So availability of low skilled labor may promote the development of manufacturing sector. If you notice, abundant low skilled labor, our growth trajectory has skipped manufacturing, growing instead on the back of a smaller, high skilled services sector. So, because availability of low skilled labor is there, this may promote the development of manufacturing sector. Look at it this way. Despite abundant low skilled labor, right? Despite is even though we have, so read it in this way. Even though we have abundant low skilled labor, we have skipped manufacturing. So this means if you have abundant low skill labor, manufacturing could be promoted. But in the Indian context, this was skipped, right? Which is why the word despite is used. So statement one is a valid assumption. Availability of low skilled labor may promote. And second statement, service sector can thrive even on a small workforce. This we are told high skilled services sector. So like I said, both these statements are essentially putting two sentences together or just this sentence, correct? So service sector can thrive even on a small workforce is coming from high skilled services sector, right? This is which part of the economy has been growing. So even on a small workforce, because most of our workforce was low skilled. So both one and valid assumptions. The third assumption, the peak growth year of this helped services sector grow. So इसमें multiple problems are there in statement 3. Peak growth years have not been discussed as these. These could be peak years, could not be peak years. We can't determine from the passage. And these peak growth years help the service sector grow faster. This could be true, but this we don't know. So A, 1 and 2 only is the correct choice for question 62. Right? We can check the peak growth years question. So we are told consequently bulk of our jobs in our economy generated even in its peak growth years was informal jobs, right? Underemployment, low intergenerational mobility or persistent features led to a lot of inequality. Then we are told uh, people who escaped poverty or who stepped out of poverty, who left behind poverty, most of escaped poverty between 2005 and 2000. So we can't say peak growth years is equal to 2005 and 2000. This is not directly stated in the passage, right? So this is invalid. Statement 3 is invalid. A is the correct choice. 1 and 2 only. This was a tricky question for many students. Now let's look at this passage. This passage is really easy. It's talking about education and what education should be. Education is the art of living, not just livelihood. The art of living cue because we should become creative based on education, etc., etc. It should train minds to think. Education systems should allow everyone to learn through experience and to develop these qualities of critical thinking, problem solving skills. However, in India, the education system has not achieved these goals, according to the author. Right? Our students are forced to learn through rote. So, rote learning is negative. We should pursue this, according to the author. All right. So, like I said, passage is fairly easy. Now we're looking for inferences. Indians cannot think critically and be creative. So this is invalid. We can't say Indians cannot think critically. From the passage, we could say Indian education system leads to many people who cannot think critically and be creative. So this we could say Indian education system leads to many people who cannot think critically and be creative. But we can't say Indians cannot. Indians as a whole cannot. So this is invalid. The second statement, one way to improve the outcome of education is to include learning by experience and reduce rote learning. So education systems must have critical thinking, problem solving skills, and learning through experience. And it should not have rote learning. So which is what statement 2 is trying to say. So option B is the correct choice. One is invalid, second one is a valid inference. All right, now let's look at this question. In terms of things we keep, now UPSC will rarely, like in terms of 25 or 30 passage questions, one of the passages could be a narrative passage. Here the author is trying to talk about himself or herself and is trying to say whether the author keeps things on. Keeping things or objects is discussed here from the point of view of it depends on your relationship to memory, how much you want to live in the past. So, do you keep objects which remind you of the past, which help you live the past or relive the past? According to the author, there are two types of people. Some people who have really good memories who don't need such objects that will remind them of the past. And there are other people who have big gaps in memory, so they don't want to let go of a single object, right? Dust encrusted trinket, single object, trinket would mean object, or something like a small object that is of some personal value. And the author is basically someone who is in the second category, who has a lot of such objects saved for reliving the past. All right. So let's look at the question. According to passage, which of the following is correct about things we keep as a souvenir? Souvenir objects to remind us of some place or some memory, right? This could have made the question a little tricky. Uh, but if you go to the passage and look at relook, take a look at the passage and uh, read it slowly, you'll figure out that souvenirs is talking about things we keep, right? So statement one, they are necessary to remind people suffering from memory loss. So this people suffering from memory loss not discussed. People who have gaps in memory are discussed, but not from memory loss. And they're necessary for these people not discussed in the passage. So one is in. Two, they keep lying idle in some drawers for years and serve no useful purpose. Yet this has not been stated in the passage. Right? Only the third thing has been implied or stated. They are most likely kept by those people, such as the author, who like to relive their past. So B3 only is the correct choice. So UPSC will rarely ask a narrative passage, maybe 1 out of 25, like I said, or 1 out of 27, which is also not every year. In this case, the correct answer was B3 only. All right, now let's let's look at this passage. Now, here, the author is trying to talk about the discussion on demerits, negative impacts of freebies distributed. This discussion of negative impacts of freebies distributed during election. Joe, we hear some political parties giving cycles, some is giving laptops, some are giving like TVs, something like that, right? The problem with this discussion, according to the author, is there is confusion about what a freebie is. Sometimes people think कि freebie is also things which are constitutional obligations, such as, people will say these constitutional obligations are also waste of resources. So sometimes freebies can be by people who are discussing freebies कि यार ये गवर्नमेंट कुछ unnecessarily पैसे वेस्ट करके बांट रहा है. Some discussions of freebies include constitutional obligations such as rations, such as Anganwadi meal supplementation, or such as Narega payments. So freebies often include necessary things. So we can oversimplify the passage to discussion on freebies is often laden with confusion about what freebies are. ठीक है. Now let's look at this question. We're looking for assumptions. First is government schemes and policies help create employment are seen as freebies by some. So correct, government schemes such as Narega are seen as freebies by some. This is true from the last sentence of the passage, right? This, excuse me, freebie discussion is basically linked to this confusion about Narega also being included as a freebie. So one is a valid assumption. Two, freebies can have both a positive and negative impact. So this is correct. A freebie can be waste of resources. It can be a TV, which also in some rare cases could be considered as useful, but overall, let's say waste of resources and negative impact such as, uh, TV again. But positive impact definitely would be Narega, right? So two is a valid assumption. Third one, if fiscal resources are adequate, freebies distributed to the public are not a problem. So adequacy of fiscal resources has not been discussed as a criteria of whether freebies are a problem or not. In fact, the author is talking about freebies discussion being muddled or confused. People don't know what a freebie is. Sometimes they'll include useful things in their conversation of freebies. So 3 is invalid. A, 1 and 2 only is the correct choice for question 71. Now, in this case, we're discussing implementation of right to education. Now, violations of right to education can occur through direct action of the state's parties, right? Or through failure of omission. They might not take action. So, violation of right to education can happen due to action or inaction of the state. Correct? This is what the passage is talking about. Right to education is still denied to millions around the world, and most of the people who are in this category are most deprived and marginalized groups of society, right? And we are told how it's denied. There are still countries जिसमें कोई legal framework नहीं है, administrative framework नहीं है to actually implement right to education. So fairly easy passage to read. Based on the passage, assumptions have been made. Let's look at statement 1. Integration of the right to education in national laws will end violation. So integration of right to education will end violation is extreme, has not been stated. We aren't told what will bring all violations to an end. All violations to end. ये concept discuss ही नहीं हुआ है passage में. So one is invalid. Two, violations of the right to education can be done by state parties, right? This could be done through action or inaction, right? So two is a valid assumption. This is based on the first sentence of passage. All right. Now here in this we are talking about how cryptocurrencies have led uh, central banks to react in different ways. So central banks are scared because of cryptocurrency, because of the uncertainty. So many central banks, 86% of central banks, were actually researching potential of starting their own digital currency, right, to fight these cryptocurrencies. Now we are given examples of some countries such as China, etc. And we are told in the case of India, there is little doubt, therefore, that India needs a digital official cryptocurrency, like an Indian official cryptocurrency or digital currency. The important questions are about details and time. So India, because currently we need that, there is little doubt. So author is outright advocating for India to come up with its own digital or cryptocurrency. Now we're asked assumptions from this. India needs to launch a digital rupee to curb possible negative impact of private cryptocurrencies. So this is based on the last two sentences of the passage, right? Why do we need it? Little doubt that India needs this digital rupee, and this is because pushed because of cryptocurrencies. Uh, we don't know how these cryptocurrencies are going to have an impact. Therefore, India needs to protect itself from those cryptocurrencies. Now, second statement, the technology behind cryptocurrency. Yet technology, according to the passage, uh, 60% of the countries are experimenting with this technology, right? So the technology behind cryptocurrency is not monopolized by private entities. So this is correct because 60% countries are trying cryptocurrency. So it's not monopolized. This is also valid. One and two are valid. Many students have gone with uh, A, or in this case, uh, option C is be chosen, but many students have in fact felt that option 2 is incorrect and therefore have gone with A. But if you notice, is not monopolized is valid. Statement 3, India needs to launch the digital currency soon to compete against Chinese digital currency. So this is an invalid assumption. India's need is not discussed from a point of view to compete against China. China, if you notice, was used as an example. China is a specific example to say that it's experimenting with technology to essentially stop private cryptocurrencies from negatively affecting it. So the competition in this case is versus private cryptocurrencies. So India versus private cryptocurrencies, China versus private cryptocurrencies. We aren't discussing India versus China, right? So many students had felt that 3 is also a valid choice, but it's invalid. The correct answer is C, 1 and 2 only. All right. So this brings to end our discussion of 27 questions. If you notice, most questions were based on main point, inference, and assumption. This is no simplification of the kind of question types you get in the exam. But if you've kept a track of where your accuracies or accuracies lie, you will know where your strengths and weaknesses are. This will help you choose which kind of questions to solve in the exam or to solve all questions or not. If you realize the assumption questions are hard, you can mostly focus on these type of questions and solve few assumption questions, and so on and so forth. All of this will depend upon your reading efficiency. How good are you at identifying the main point? How good are you at looking for evidence to determine your answer choices? So we discuss all of these elements during our classes. I expect all of you to follow those instruments closely to ensure accuracy. So thank you for tuning in, and make sure that you follow the analysis of your paper thoroughly to realize how much more investment of time is required in either the verbal aspect of CSAT or reasoning or maths. And that way you can determine how much investment of time is required before your actual prelims exam. So thank you for tuning in to the discussion of the ANUBHAV paper. All right. All the best, everyone.